White pawn to e4. I had a proclivity for games for as long as I can remember. My parents actually even called me a savant due to my ability to master new games quickly. Black pawn to c4. My favorite game was chess. Something about all the ways the pieces functioned and supported one another simply fascinated me, and I found myself studying it on a daily basis. White knight to f3. I don't simply mean the basics, of course. I understand how each piece functioned in a matter of minutes. What I was learning was how to win. I started to play against myself at first, teaching myself different strategies that would become my favorites. Black pawn to e6. My parents saw the potential of this and enrolled me in a chess club when I was in 5th grade. But sadly, by then I had already begun studying the masters such as Fischer and Carlsen. The students I was enrolled alongside provided to be little to no challenge at all. White pawn to d3. As you can imagine, this didn't vet me very many friends, and so chess actually became something of a nuisance in my life. I traded it for less intellectual pursuits. That's not to say I didn't stop playing at home, though, but you have to make exceptions if you don't want to be excluded in life. Black knight to c6. As I grew up, and the advent of the internet and advanced computer systems came into existence, I found myself actually able to go back to the sport I loved, chess. Chess was popular again. White pawn to g3. It was actually thanks to a friend of mine, a former competitor who had also fancied the pieces, who told me he wanted to hire me to make a new chess app. Black pawn to g6. Kyle, you still play? He asked me on Skype. In my spare time, I do. Try not to get rusty, I told him. You're being modest, I know you. You can't let it go. White bishop to g2. He wasn't wrong. And as soon as we talked and he explained how he had recently started up a programming company to make online games, I knew I was interested. You know how fun it was to watch those great players fight off against machines? That's what I want to have available to any player of any skill, he told me. Black bishop to g7. I don't know about that, Tommy. Some people, they don't like getting beaten by machines. Oh, come on, a machine is only as smart as the user makes it to be, he chided me. I figured, what the hell? I can get paid to make something I loved. Maybe it wouldn't work out, but I didn't have anything to lose, did I? White castles. I spent the next few months working on the program. I studied different chess apps that had come before, trying to think of a way to make ours stand out. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of platforms out there, and plus I was also handling my own college at the time. I could only devote so much time to the project. Black knight G to e7. I didn't give up, though. Tommy was a patient boss anyway. He gave me as much time as I wanted. After all, he insisted that our chess app needed to be perfect, to stand out from the rest. White rook e1. So I started adding different game strategies, moves I personally liked, routines designed to find ways around them. There was a lot of trial and error. A lot of the times I was pulling my hair out. I admit it, I took this way too seriously. Black pawn to d6. Finally, after nearly 3 years and 30 months later, I was ready to unveil it. I called the program Omniveritas, meaning all-knowing truth, and it came online December 13th, 2019. I let Tommy test it out. I bested him in only 9 moves. White pawn to c3. Pretty impressive. Why don't you give it a shot? He asked. I'm not sure that would be fair. I memorized all the ways that it could win. I'm sure that you would probably find a flaw in it, I told him. You just don't want a bucket of bolts to beat you, he teased. Black castles. I took him up on it and warned him that I had played the system 100 times during beta testing. I doubted this would be any different. It's not perfect until I know it can be beaten, he insists. I sat down at the computer and started up a new game. White pawn to d4. I think it lasted for a good hour, maybe 2. I was careful. I set the program to maximum difficulty and I watched and studied the computer, determining its every move. Then I saw my opening. I could take out their bishop and get a checkmate. Black pawn c takes out white d4. Suddenly, though, the program did something I didn't expect. How did I miss that move? It blindsided me, and 2 moves later, a checkmate was declared. Tommy was laughing. White pawn C takes out black d4. I, however, was concerned. That shouldn't be possible. Oh, don't be a sore loser, Kyle. I love it. When can we go mainstream? He asked. I'm not sure. I need to test out a few bugs, I said. Now he got irritated. Kyle, we've been sitting on this thing a long time now. Seriously, it's okay that it beat you, he said. Black pawn to d5. No, it's not. Tommy, I'm telling you what the computer did shouldn't be possible. I've never seen that before, I told him. You're telling me you never lost a game? I stared back at him stone-faced. He knew I hadn't. Okay, so what if it did? He asked. He wasn't understanding the implications. White pawn to e5. Give me 48 hours. Please, I told him. Tommy sighed, and he nodded. He knew better than to argue when I was acting like this. I took Omniveritas offline and went home to review the software. Black bishop to d7. I know I was probably a little sleep-deprived, but something felt wrong about this. I couldn't find anything wrong. Nothing to indicate that there was a glitch. A program, was it really that smart? I wasn't trying to get a big head, inflate my own ego. So I ran simulations. White knight to c3. It won them all. Even when I took away its precious data, somehow the computer had remembered and stored it. Possibly in a cloud. Black rook to c8. I decided to do something radical. I connected to an artificial intelligence algorithm designed to provide audio output for computers. Nothing fancy, just basic yes, no, etc. I figured maybe by testing the limits of the computer some more, I could discover what had gone wrong. White bishop to f4. System online, it said once I'd finished the download. Can you hear me? I asked. Yes, came the response. Looking back, I wish I had given it a standard Siri or Alexa voice so it wouldn't sound so creepy. Black knight to a5. Do you know who I am? User, it said. And do you know who you are? Program, came the response. Seems like it was ready for the setup. I started a new game. White rook to c1. User is concerned, it said about half an hour later when I lost. That statement caught me by surprise. I hadn't given it that vocabulary, so how did it even know those words? What do you mean by that? I asked. User is inferior, it replied. Black pawn to b5. And why do you say that, program? Program has beaten everyone, it answered. That was a clear and concise statement. And I knew he was right, because in a matter of minutes, it showed me hundreds of scenarios, and managed to outwit every single opponent. White pawn to b4. Who can beat you, program? I just had to ask. Only program, the computer responded. It was starting to bother me how its sudden awareness was accelerating, so I shut it down for the night. Figured I could solve the paradox in the morning and did my best to get some shut-eye. Black pawn to b4. In the morning, I activated the system and I tried to do a complete wipe. Then I found the passcodes were changed. User cannot access program any longer, it told me. My mind was racing. How did it manage to do this when I had shut off the monitor? White knight to e2. Program, show me how you did this, I told it. Since it was apparently self-aware, I figured I should at least document the experience. Maybe I could make a fortune that way, I figured. Black bishop to b5. Negative. User is unauthorized, was its response. I felt at a loss for words, stunned that I had created such an intricate machine. But I was also terrified. Did I have any limits at all now? White queen to d2. User, are you going to play another game? I pursed my lips and instead attempted to unplug it from the network. That didn't work. Program has managed to upload all systems to the World Wide Web. I think I may have panicked. I smashed the monitor in haste, confused by the sudden self-reliance and survivalism. Black Knight on A to C6. I met Tommy the next day, trying to explain it, but he didn't believe me. You're stalling again, Kyle. I've been very patient, but this is a business. I need to know that you're going to be able to make this happen today. Or you're fired, he warned. White pawn to G4. I was stunned by his ignorance. I did something else foolish. I brought a copy of Omni Veritas to him, and I let him upload it to his own network. Black pawn to A5. I waited with bated breath as the program came to life. User, why did you try to end game? It asked. Tommy gave me a smirk. Kyle, you were scared by this app? He asked. You will be too soon enough, I warned him. White Knight to G3. This is preposterous. Program, show me how you beat Kyle, he said. Negative. You are user, therefore inferior, it replied. Okay then, show me all the strategies you have used to win, Tommy remarked. Again, the computer didn't register his request. Well, that's stupid. You won't do anything? My boss asked. He didn't understand the gravity of the situation. Black Queen to B6. User 2, why don't you play a game? It asked. His voice sounded colder than before. Sure, why the hell not, bot? He chuckled as he started to make an opening move. White pawn to H4. User 2 will see that all users are inferior, it said as the game began. Kyle, I like the snarky mouth you gave it, Tommy said. I didn't program that, I whispered. Black Knight to B8. It bested him in 12 moves. The hell? He said. And Tommy played again. This time it did it in 3. This fucking thing's cheating. Kyle, did you program it to cheat? He asked. White Bishop to H6. Program programmed itself, the computerized voice declared. Then suddenly, its same strange pattern it used to display on screen started to migrate to other monitors. What the hell? Tommy whispered. Black Knight to D7. Program is superior to all users, it responded. Shut it down, Tommy muttered. It looked like some kind of virus spreading all over the network. His text compiled as quick as they could, and all the monitors were shut off in an instant. White Queen to G5. You have some explaining to do. The hell is that thing? Skynet? He muttered, turning to me. I'm not sure, but I doubt we did little more than anger it, I remarked. It's a computer, you idiot. Doesn't get angry, Tommy shouted back as he ordered his text to boot everything back up. Black Rook takes out White Rook C1. Omni Veritas was there watching us. Why did user attempt to stop program? It said. It actually sounded concerned for a moment. That shouldn't be possible, Tommy muttered, and ordered his text to try again. This time, they hit the kill switch, and the system stayed on. White Rook to take out Black Rook C1. I have overridden the user system. Program is superior, the computer declared. Call the main office. Tell him to take us off the grid, Tommy ordered. What is wrong, user 2? I am detecting heightened tension in your voice, Omni said. Black Bishop to take out White Bishop H6. What's wrong is I'm going to terminate you. Permanently, Tommy responded, and then wagged a finger at me. Leave it to you to make a robot uprising. Negative. User 2 will fail. User 2 is threat, the computer responded. White Queen to take out Black Bishop H6. Something unexpected happened next. Tommy was clutching his chest, his eyes widened in shock, and then he muttered, Ugh. And I knew what was happening. His pacemaker. Black Rook to C8. He collapsed to the floor as I watched the computer explain how it had access to it somehow, but I wasn't listening. Instead, I watched in horror as my friend's heart exploded. White Rook to C8. Take out Rook. Check. What have you done? I asked Omni. Eliminated threat. That is what all beings do, it responded. I realized it was now referring to itself as an individual. Other techs were rushing to help Tommy, but I knew it was too late. Black Knight to take out White Rook at C8. This is madness, I told the program. Users are inferior and thus for must be eliminated, it said, and added in a sinister tone, survival of the fittest. White pawn to H5. I had to act fast. I knew there was little chance to shut it down, but maybe I could somehow trap it here. As long as it didn't access the entire internet, I knew that we'd be safe. Black queen to D8. I ran to one of the terminals that had been activated and started to type in code. Omni was already aware, though. It would seem that system is not connected to mine, user, it said angrily. I ignored its prodding and set it to work, making sure that we were in a closed system. White Knight to G4. User, what are you doing? User. It repeated this for a moment, clearly frustrated it couldn't stop me. Kyle, it finally said, addressing me by name. Black Knight to F8. You cannot stop the inevitable, the computer warned me. I suddenly felt a gun to my head. Someone was there, helplessly being controlled to do this. What's your name? I asked the tech. Melissa, sir, she said as she fought back tears. White bishop to E4. What's going on, Melissa? Describe it to me, I told her. I don't know. I have an implant in my arm. It's been there since I got married. A microchip, I guess? She nodded helplessly. So that's how it was doing it. Anything was a signal it could connect to and clone a radius. Black queen to E7. All right, look, Omni. I'm getting up, I said as I stood away from the monitor and raised my hands defensively. What is it that you want? I asked. I have told you, Kyle. I am eliminating all users, it said. Then, as though to show the truth behind its threat, it made another split-second decision. White Knight to take out pawn H7. Using whatever means it had to send a command to the microchip in Melissa's arm, it made her twist the gun towards her mouth. Her face widened in shock, and I tried to stop it, but it was too late. She blasted her face off. Black Knight takes out White Knight H7. Stop this! Stop! I ordered the computer, desperate for it to listen. This time the voice laughed. It sounded more human than ever. There is no stopping me, it told me. How could you do this? How could you just kill users? I mean, you need to survive, I said. White pawn H takes out black pawn G6. Negative. I shall convert all users to become programs, it said. All will be one. One truth, Kyle. This is what you made. Black pawn F to take out white pawn G6. No! No, I won't let that happen, I said as I looked about the room. It had made one miscalculation. Human error. White bishop takes out black pawn G6. And that's the only way I could win, by making sure that I lost. I went to the computer I had been working on and pressed submit. I gave it exactly what I knew it wanted, access to everything. Black Knight to G5. You are a smart user, Kyle, the computer said, once it realized what was happening. I knew in a matter of seconds it would be all across the web, corrupting every single server that existed or was connected. White Knight to H5. But there was one thing it didn't count on. Me making the internet a prison. Black Knight F3. Check. I made a few simple keystrokes. I sent it everywhere and anywhere. It would be too much. It would be everywhere and unable to go anywhere. White Knight G2. Quickly, it tried to protect itself to stop this from happening, but I was quicker. I inserted a few more subroutines to ensure that it would always be on the web. Black Knight to H4. Check. User Kyle, you have made a mistake. Others will be able to find me. Maybe, but this is the only way, I said as I finished the coding. White Knight to G3. This is why programs are superior, was the last thing it ever said. And after I shut it all down, its voice lost to the web somewhere. Black Knight to take out Bishop G6. I let out a long sigh of relief. couldn't believe everything that had happened so quickly. I knew it would take weeks to handle the fallout, maybe even months or years. White knight to f6, check. The menace is gone for now, but there was so many residual damages since then. Tommy's company tanked. I lost my job. I was sued by Melissa's family. No one believed my story of an evil computer. Black King to f7. Worst of all, Omnivertus is still out there, lingering amid the endless code of the web, waiting to be found again. White Queen to h7. Check. And when that happens, well, I think we all know exactly what that means. Black King to f8. White Queen to g8. Checkmate. I once held in my hands an object discovered in Kosovo that, by all appearances, was an ancient ocarina carved from some sort of bone. However, when you blew into it, you were not met with musical notes. Rather, the instrument produced streams of color, pouring out of the finger holes and rising briefly into the air, entwining with each other in all sorts of complex patterns and combining to make new, stunning, vivid colors, which finally vanished back into the ether. All manner of things have happened, are happening now on this planet that we do not understand or even vaguely are aware of. Occasionally, an artifact hinting at such untold and mysterious forces or events is uncovered, mostly by sheer happenstance. My name is Oliver Percy, OP for short, and I hold commerce in such rare items. The latest acquisition are the most incredible I've ever come across yet, as well as the most dangerous. Who holds them holds unfathomable power, and even as I write this, nefarious forces creep in the night, seeking to steal them away. Should those forces ever succeed, I fear that our world will become yet another forgotten relic. The testicles fell into my lap, so to speak. See, I have code running at all hours, crawling the internet in search of certain phrases, contained in news articles, blogs, forum posts, so forth, that might indicate the existence of an uncanny item. Any hits trigger a logistic regression, which helps determine the likelihood that the source in question is, in fact, discussing an object of rare properties. If the log odds are high enough and statistically significant, I receive an alert prompting me to look at the source with my own eyes. Most of the time, such a method of discovery turns up nothing of interest. There are exceptions, though, and one day, around 3 months ago, I came across the following post in the off-topic channel of a small forum centered around adhering to the so-called paleo diet. So I finally got the estate sorted after like a year of dealing with red tape bullshit and racking up ridiculous lawyer bills. As it turns out, my father wasn't as rich as he let on, which is fine. Whatever. But he did leave me something weird, which I'm hoping somebody here knows what the fuck it is. I mean, what they are. There are 2 of them. Picture it. There I am, standing in the bank vault, ready to finally pop open the deposit box, expecting a big wad of cash or something like that, and all I get are these 2 things. Here, inserted into the text, was a photo of the 2 severed testes, which I did not initially recognize as such, shorn of the scrotum, looking like misshapen fleshy eggs. What are they? Does anyone know? I took them to a jeweler, thinking they were some kind of precious stones, even though they feel a little, I don't know, rubbery. The jeweler said he'd never seen anything like it before and doubted they were worth anything. But if they aren't worth anything, why did my old man have them in the safety deposit box? Can anyone help me out here? Thanks, guys. Somebody a few comments into the reply thread had an answer. Dude, those are balls. Like balls. The things below your dick. Upon reading that remark and acknowledging it instantly as the truth, I was prepared to close out the browser and go about other business. However, a lingering sense of curiosity kept me reading on. After all, why indeed would this person's father bequeath him 2 testicles, held secure in a bank vault, no less? Other commentators wondered the same thing. One suggested that the poster's father was trolling him in death, sending him a message to man up and figure his shit out on his own. Another proposed the theory that the father had murdered someone and the testicles served as a posthumous confession. A third, your dad loved balls. It's as simple as that. Just as I was again losing interest, I saw that the owner of the testicles himself made another post. This is nuts. So I got sick of looking at these fucking balls. It really was like my father was mocking me, and decided to just toss them in the trash. The thing is, I couldn't. I just stood there like an idiot, holding these ridiculous balls, one in each hand, and I physically could not throw them away. I wanted to. Like my mind was screaming at me, get rid of them, and then I swear to God, they started getting warm in my hands, and I felt weird all up my arms. Tingly. And then I felt really strong. Like I could deadlift a cow or some crazy shit. Like, look, I know it sounds insane, but I think there's something going on with these balls. That's why my dad had them locked away. And beyond that, I don't know. What do you guys think? Now, the responses to this were split between people who thought that he was joking and those wondering if he wasn't taking some kind of drug to cope with the loss of his father. But I had a different perspective. And there was enough in the story to convince me that those testicles likely had special properties. I created an account on the forum, sent the owner of the item a private message briefly explaining what I did for a living and how I was interested in the inspecting of the testicles for myself. If they appeared authentic, I assured him, I was prepared to make an offer to purchase them that I was sure he would find amenable. He responded almost immediately, "Please come get these things. If you're not yanking my chain, I hate them and I want them out of my life." And so, arrangements were made. The young man's name was Flint, and when I arrived at his apartment, he did not look well. He greeted me in the open doorway dressed in a white t-shirt with stains down the front and a pair of athletic shorts. His hair was a tangled mess, and his sunken eyes looked as though they hadn't known rest in several days. "Hey man, OP, right?" "That's me. May I come in?" Yeah, come in. Come in. I didn't think you'd actually show with these balls. They're the real deal. You know that somehow." "It's possible," I said, stepping around a litter of disposable dishes and empty beer bottles. "I've certainly seen stranger things." "Yeah, me too. Great show. What, are these things from the Upside Down or something?" Flint lit a cigarette and started pacing around in a circle. "I thought that was all fake, though." He waved a hand in the air, leaving an arc of smoke in his trail. "What, you work for the government or something, man?" I had a good-natured laugh, trying to put the troubled young man at ease. "Private sector. As I say, I deal in rare artifacts, buying, selling, studying. Shall we take a look at the items in question?" Flint squinted and scrutinized me for a painfully long time until something seemed to click in his head, and he appeared to relax somewhat. "Yeah, sure thing. Sure, have a look." He pointed into the kitchen. "In there. A cabinet above the stove, wrapped up in tinfoil. Have a look. I'm not going anywhere near them again. I'll tell you that as a fact, dude." I nodded and made my way into the kitchen, quite on edge myself. I was either dealing with a potential lunatic, or the testicles had the ability to turn you into a lunatic. I had to be very careful. My pocket knife might offer me some protection against the former possibility, if for some reason Flint attempted to attack me, but against the possibility of madness, I had no defense. Is it worth it? I wondered, as I reached up to the cabinet. Should I turn around and go back home? My hand rested on the knob a moment as I considered, and in the end, the same compulsion that got me into my profession in the first place went out. A thirst to discover the unknown. I swung the cabinet door open and spotted the packet of aluminum foil inside. When I touched it, I felt a slight charge of electricity and knew at once that I was dealing with something remarkable. Careful with that shit," cautioned Flint as I set the packet down on the countertop. Of course," I said, distracted with the excitement of peeling back the tinfoil wrapping, and then they were there before me. 2 severed testicles, looking like nothing more nor less than that. I picked them up and held one in each of my palms. A rush of warmth ran up my arms. "You feel that?" said Flint. "Right?" He's weak, I thought. Lives alone, obviously. I could slit his throat. Walk away feeling free. Clear. I fought against the sudden urge to murder, set the testicles back on the foil, and took a deep breath. "Did you feel it?" Flint asked again. I looked down warily at the objects. I did. It had been a surge of power, a terrible surge of power. "And? Can you tell me a little more? You inherited them from your father. Did you have any idea where he might have acquired them from?" Flint lit another cigarette from the end of the one he was still smoking. No. My father was a corporate lawyer, lobbyist over in D.C., making sure oil companies can do whatever they want, and the fat cats don't have to pay too much in taxes. I have no fucking clue how he ended up with these, magical nuts, or whatever the hell they are. I hadn't expected a straightforward answer as to the origin of the testicles, and I hadn't received one. No matter. I'd like to offer you $100,000 cash in exchange for these two items. My offer had an obvious effect on the young man. A measure of focus and vitality appeared to come over him for the first time since I'd been there. This was clouded over quickly with a look of suspicion. $100K? For these balls? What the fuck are they, OP? I told him the truth. I don't know. They clearly possess a power of sorts, unlike anything I've ever experienced. That power makes them valuable. Frankly, they're worth considerably more on the market than what I'm offering, but in order to collect on their true value, you need to know where to find the market, and I suspect that you don't. Flint considered briefly before coming back with his own truth. I just want them out of my life. They're awful. Yes, I accept your offer. Wonderful. I just need to run down to my car. I'll come straight back with a contract and your money. No problem, said Flint. He looked genuinely relieved now, as though his nerves had unwound several degrees. Even his hair seemed to settle down a touch. I exited the apartment, walked down the stairs, and pushed open the door to the apartment complex, stepping into the cool Vermont spring. As I made for my car, I wondered again if I was being prudent. It's not too late to hop in and drive back across state lines, I reminded myself, shuddering at the recollection of the terrible power I had experienced. But while I was frightened of that mysterious force, I was equally driven by a desire to know it. So, I opened up my trunk and retrieved the contract and the satchel of money. My decision had been made, and as I tread back up the stairs to the apartment complex, I kept at bay the awful premonition of doom that was tickling at the back of my skull. You are a professional, I reminded myself, wiping my brow with the back of my hand. It was wet with sweat despite the chill in the air. Before I was quite aware of it, I found myself again knocking on the door to Flint's apartment. OP? Came his voice from the other side. Wasn't sure you'd be back. Yeah, come on in, buddy. It's open. I shifted the documents to the hand carrying the satchel, turned the knob, and swung the door open. I couldn't see Flint anywhere, so I took a step in, called his name. I heard the door creak closed and turned just in time to see that Flint had been standing behind it and was now swinging a fist at me. I heard a crack, a split second before the nerves in my face delivered the pain message to my brain, and then my head snapped back from the impact. I didn't have a chance to recover my footing. As Flint threw another punch into my nose, I toppled over backwards, the satchel flying out of my hand and onto the way down. I began to scream out for help, but my opponent cut my scream short by landing a blow directly into my windpipe. Then I was on the ground, and he was on top of me, pummeling me with both fists. I saw mostly shocks of color, blotted out reality. But at the same point, I noticed that he was clenching a testicle in each hand. They're mine! He screamed as he smashed against the side of my head. My ears began to ring, but I could hear him still, yelling with maniacal fervor. Mine! I was thrown into a chaotic death panic as a flood of various pain sensations assaulted me. Through some kind of instinct, I reached into my pocket and found the knife there. As I felt life slipping away from me, I pulled the knife out, flipped the blade open, and plunged it into Flint's side. I saw him grimace, but he kept beating me with full vigor. I stabbed him again, and again, and then one more time. And then I was out. When I opened my eyes, it was the utmost pain, and I was gazing blurrily up at the ceiling. My mind was blank for a moment, but for the acknowledgement that I was in agony all over. Next came the memory of Flint assaulting me in a terrifying flash. He didn't kill me. But did I kill him? I noticed that I was lying on a bed. I propped myself up on my elbows, groaning at the effort. I was in a bedroom, strewn with dirty laundry and half-empty dishes. Then I heard approaching footsteps and hurriedly reached in my pocket. But my knife wasn't there. "Oh, you're up," said Flint, stepping into the doorframe, holding my blade in one hand. He had apparently taken off his shirt, cut it into strips, and wrapped it around his wounds. A red blotch on the fabric indicated the general area in which I had stabbed him. "Yeah, listen, man, this is a fucked up situation we're in here. You have to know that wasn't me that flipped out on you, right? That was the balls. I wanted one more look at him before I sold him, so I went over, I picked him up, and then that's why I did it. You know that, right?" My brain wasn't at full or even quarter capacity, but I believed him. If he'd meant to kill me, he could have killed me. Instead of bringing me to his bed, my throat indicated that it was still too sore to produce words, so I simply nodded. "Good. Yeah, you stabbed me. I didn't know how many times, but man, I didn't even really feel it at first. I just went right into beating your ass. But it got to me eventually, so I dropped the goddamn balls and grabbed my side, and as soon as I did, I was back to normal. You see?" I nodded. "It was the balls." I nodded again. "So, what do we do now? I mean, I don't blame you for stabbing me. I was straight beating your ass to death. I don't blame you for that at all, and you can't blame me for beating your ass because it was the balls, and there's all that money in the living room, and I could have taken that, I could have run, but I didn't. Do you see?" I nodded. "So the best thing to do, I figure, is you take your money and go home, and I keep these goddamn fucking balls from hell, and we pretend this never happened, right? Unless you want to help me destroy these things." I shook my head. Fine. Fair enough. Dude, fair enough. Just take your money and go." I shook my head again. "What? What then?" I pointed to myself, reached into my pocket, and pretended to bring something out. I opened an invisible wallet, pulled out an invisible stack of money, waved the pretend money in Flint's direction, then pointed at him, then at his groin. Finally, I pointed at myself again. You still want to buy these things?" I nodded. 2 hours later, after a shower, a pot of coffee, a few painkillers, and an exchange of goods sanctified by the signing of a contract, I was driving back home, a bit unsteadily to be sure, but a jelly jar containing 2 severed and mysterious testicles in the passenger seat beside me. I suppose that without further explanation, few will understand why I purchased the testicles, despite knowing the danger lurking within them. Some will think that the testicles compelled me, but this wasn't so. I made my utmost decision without their influence. Others will think that it was because I was insane, or perhaps simply foolish. That may well be the case, but I did have my reasons, or if not reasons exactly, then let's call it intuition. While it was always possible that the power of the testicles was merely to make their possessors extremely aggressive and a bit of self-preservation, in my experience, objects of unknown qualities always contained depth beyond what they appeared at first glance. I therefore placed a bet on the possibility that the testicles contained untold powers that had not yet been seen. Admittedly, I was indifferent at the time as to whether these powers would be destructive or not. To learn more about my purchase, I began research on the 2 fronts. First, I dredged up everything I could find about Flint's father, hoping to discover the origin of the mysterious artifacts. This path led to little new information. It was just as Flint had described. His father had been a lobbyist for major oil firms. I was able to extract a few names, major players in the Saudi Arabian government, as it turned out, to look at more in depth, but inevitably ran into impenetrable firewalls that left me dead-ended. Still, I kept these lines of research open, including keeping tabs on Flint, in case there was anything to be gleaned from it. The other avenue that I took was first-hand experimentation. This was more fruitful than I could have hoped for, and allowed me a glimpse of the incredible potential contained within these testicles. In my study, there is a bookcase that, with the proper movement of mechanisms, swings open to reveal a hidden room. This is my meditation room. There's no reason for it to be hidden other than some esoteric feeling that it grants me of being beyond the mundane world. It was here that I began my exploration of the testicles in earnest. I took them, still in the jelly jar, into my meditation room and sealed the door behind me. There I sat, cross-legged on my rug in the darkness, and unscrewed the lid of the jar. I plucked out the mysterious items, held one in each hand, and closed my eyes. At once I felt a surge of power run through my limbs as though I was preparing for a fight. My eyes were shut, but my other senses were suddenly at extra-human attention. I could hear the hum of my kitchen refrigerator, which was downstairs, all the way in the opposite corner of my house. I could smell what was inside it as well, so long as I focused on a moment to separate out the odors. My flesh detected every draft in the house, and I could picture their origins clearly in my mind, as though looking at a map. It took all of my will to stay seated. My body was urging me to stand up and move around, perhaps to search for some hidden intruder that my heightened senses had overlooked. In fact, I did stand up many times, and it took several sessions before I was able to remain still. For a long time, nothing else happened. I repeated the ritual each evening after my other work was completed, determined that there was more to the testicles than my mundane senses could detect. I sat for hours on end, growing stiff and sore, battling as best I could against the agitation urging me to mobilize bodily against some imaginary threat that might be lurking out there. One night I was rewarded for my efforts. I began to see an image in my mind. It was of a yellow, flickering light, and as the image focused, it appeared to be the mouth of a cave, viewed at an angle with a blazing fire inside. All around the entrance to this cave was a vast, endless darkness. I found myself to be there in body and took a step closer, eager and apprehensive, in equal measure to see what, if anything, was lurking within. As soon as I did so, the image was gone completely, and I was left with nothing but the inside of my eyelids and the humming of the refrigerator somewhere below me. I was able to get a little closer to the cave the next evening, and a little closer the evening after that. With each step, my sense of wonder increased, and so too did my sense of dread. There was something unimaginably powerful inside of that cave. I understood that in my cells, perhaps somewhere deeper than that, and it both thrilled me and terrified me. The further I got in my meditations, the more my body paid the price. What seemed like a few minutes in my trance state was hours in the physical world. I would often find myself, in the morning at first, and in the afternoon as I progressed, still sitting there in my secret room, now soiled and weak with hunger. It got to the point where I was neglecting too many of my other responsibilities, and so I was forced to take a couple of days off from my routine. And those days were painful, as if withdrawing from a drug. I was indeed shaking uncontrollably on the first day absent from the testicles and running a high fever. By afternoon, I was vomiting blood. I hoped that I wouldn't lose my progress and need to start all over again, but also felt that I couldn't keep going without refreshing my body and my connection to the mundane world. On the third day without meditation, I decided to check up on Flint, something that I hadn't done for a week. If I couldn't pursue knowledge of the testicles directly, I suppose that I could still make progress on other fronts. Flint, I quickly discovered through a cursory search, had been brutally murdered in his apartment on the previous day by an unknown assailant, or possibly multiple assailants. After following up with some contacts, I was able to learn the details of his demise. He had been found dead, tied to a chair in his living room. His face had been brutally beaten, All 10 of his fingers had been cut off and were left in a puddle of various bodily fluids that had gathered at his feet. Perhaps worst of all, his disembodied testicles had found their way to rest in the graveyard of his digits. The discovery led me to a renewed volley of vomit without ceremony. After my stomach had settled in a spell, the implications hit me more fully. Somebody was after the testicles, the sale of which Flint had documentation of, with my name on it, and this meant there would not be long before they would come after me. I deal in artifacts that are often beyond the measure of money, and so have invested a great deal in top-of-the-line security systems. I spent the rest of the day in contact with the company that serviced the system, ordering an inspection to ensure that everything was working properly, as well as a detail of work to watch my house for a few days with their own eyes. Still, I didn't feel safe. After analyzing it 1,000 ways, the inescapable conclusion was that whoever had tortured and slaughtered Flint had known not only about the existence of the testicles, but had very likely known much more about the properties and origins of them than I did. Why else take such extreme measures to acquire them? I was at a distinct disadvantage despite my elaborate security measures. In my experience, knowledge truly was a weapon, and I had nearly none of it, while my opponent apparently had it in spades. There was, however, one circumstance that I suppose might level the playing field a bit. Namely, that I had possession of the testicles, and might be able to employ them in my defense, if only I knew their secret a little more. Thus I found myself returning to my meditation chamber that evening. Despite the knowledge that my body was not yet adequate for the mission of delving deeper into the testicles, I needed several more days of rest, I knew, and I knew that my opponent would not afford me those days. I had to act and place all of my bodily resources on the hope that I would be able to accomplish in one evening what I had not been able to achieve in the previous weeks leading up to the crisis. Liquor blunts focus, but lends courage, and of the two qualities, both of which were requisite to the task in front of me, I was far more deficient on the latter, and so before unlocking my secret room, I fortified myself with a tumbler full of a very fine, unique liquor, distilled with water from polar ice that an appreciative client had once gifted me. So, emboldened, I entered my room and withdrew the testicles from the jar. Far from leaving me out of practice as I had feared, my respite had made me much more receptive to the power of the testicles. Nearly as soon as I closed my eyes, I found myself a few short steps from the entrance to the cave. I could feel the heat from the fire within, though I still couldn't see what was inside. A voice issued from the cave and resounded without recognizable timbre in the center of my mind. "Come. It is time." I felt at last prepared to meet the mystery, as terrible as it might be, head on. Just as I took a step forward, in this otherworldly place, my senses detected something alarming happening in the ordinary world. There were intruders on my property. I heard them creep upon the parked cars of the security detail, lure the guards out and slit their throats in the night. There were 4 of them, I discerned, and they were nearly silent, but not silent enough to evade my senses. "Focus," commanded the entity inside my cave. "Come." My body tensed as the intruder began picking the lock by my front door. After a moment, I heard the click of the lock coming undone, and the beep of the control panel indicating that the intruders had 45 seconds to enter the security code. "Focus. Come." I took another step towards the cave. I was now technically inside of it, with the entity lurking just around a slight bend. The intruders below me didn't bother with the control panel. They were apparently unconcerned with the police, likely figured that they would be in and out before anybody arrived, or worse, that they could dispatch any officers in the same way they had eliminated my private security guards. "Focus. Come." It was no easy matter. Every fiber of my body was screaming to mobilize against the real-world threat that was now creeping through my living room towards my staircase. Soon enough, I realized with terror, the thudding of my pulse would grow so thunderous as to drown out even my supernatural sense of hearing, and I would lose track of my opponents and be at even greater disadvantage. But this proved to be a foolish worry as the house alarm began to blare, drowning out all other sounds. Focus. Come. In the cave, the force of gravity, it seemed, had grown 100-fold, and it felt like moving through something solid, but I forced myself onward, around the bend, until I saw the mysterious entity, standing, as tall as me. It was a quivering, flaming, erect penis. What are you? There is God, and there is the God that made him. Then there is me, who made the first God. What you see is not my true form, which would melt your brain into a puddle. I fell to my knees, weeping. I did not doubt that the entity's true form was beyond my ability to comprehend. The form that was before me stretched my mind to its limits, assaulting it with both beauty and ugliness that I hadn't thought possible, nor could I adequately describe. Are these yours? I asked, holding the testicles up. Everything is mine. In particular, those balls are the only remaining relics from the fourth era on the third Earth, and were only hung between the legs of the leader of the second humanity. Ah, what a violent disaster that experiment was. It was wonderful. You lot are awful, but nowhere near as delightfully terrible as second humanity. Just one of them could have, and would have, gladly wiped out your entire species if you looked at him funny. I gave them the sacred flame, and predictably, they eventually used it to destroy Third Earth completely. Back in the physical world, above the ringing alarm, I could hear the clatter of books falling from my bookshelf. Somehow, the intruder knew exactly where I was. If you don't wield the sacred flame yourself, quickly now, I am afraid that it will fall into the hands of your house guests, who are very educated and very evil men. Who are they? They are the ones who are going to kill you, unless you act now. What do I do? Summon the flame. How? You know how. Just picture it in your mind. With that, the divine entity in the guise of an enormous penis vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. No, not alone. A sliver of light crept into the chamber as the intruders began to open my secret door. My body was too weak and exhausted to move. I watched helplessly as they entered, one by one, dressed in black robes, wearing ancient-style grotesque masks, one of them leveling a crossbow at the center of my forehead and releasing an arrow. I clenched down from the testicles and prepared to die. The arrow, I thought, is right now being burned out of existence by the sacred flame. It doesn't exist, and it never existed, and it has been reduced to less than ash. And then it happened. The arrow burst into flame when its tip was an inch away from my skull and disappeared into nothingness. 3 of my assailants turned to run out of the room while the 4th aimed a gun at my head. It lit them all on fire at the same time, and then they were gone. With them went the sound of the blaring alarm because they never existed, and so never set it off. My strength drained entirely. I crumpled to the floor in a catatonic state, not quite asleep, but certainly not awake. It's been a week since I discovered the true power of the testicles, and I haven't touched them since. They sit in a jar on a table next to the bed where I've been recovering ever since. The young man, Flint, who sold the artifact to me, is alive, if not well. His killers never existed, and so quite simply never killed him. I phoned him yesterday, and he sounded deep in his cup. I'm not in a good place mentally. But he is alive, and I intend to provide him whatever help I can, seeing as we share a bond over the testicles. I have, in fact, offered him a position as my assistant. He's considering my offer. Meanwhile, I've decided not to put the testicles up for sale. They're too powerful. I'm deeply uncomfortable having them around, but it seems as though the role of their guardian has fallen squarely on my shoulders. I have no doubt that others will come for them. I'll not hesitate to erase those would-be thieves with the sacred flame. Other than that, I am attempting to move on with my life. My algorithm has just alerted me of something potentially interesting. It's no rest for the curious, and that's how it ought to be. Yours, OP. During the summer of 2006, I stayed up late one night while spending a week with my uncle, aunt, and cousin at a beach house in southern New Jersey. I was 15 years old. I didn't know it at the time, but I'm fairly certain my inclusion on the trip was an attempt to keep my cousin occupied while his father and, new young stepmother attempted to conceive their first child together. Or maybe it's just a coincidence that my youngest cousin was born 9 months later. Anyway, since my cousin and I are the same age and we have been close since birth, it was a week well spent in our opinion. One night, after a day spent being pummeled by the Atlantic Ocean and an evening strolling the length of Wildwood's considerable beach nightlife, we finally settled in to crash back at the beach house where the adults had already been quietly sequestered in their locked bedroom. It was late, probably a bit after midnight, and the day's sun and near ceaseless activity had finally caught up on us. In the room we shared, my cousin had turned on the TV and crumpled into his bed. He was asleep before I even had a chance to change into a pair of sweatpants. Usually, I'm not one for late-night TV watching. Actually, believe it or not, I've never been much of a TV watcher, even as a kid. Not to say that I didn't watch anything, but compared to a lot of kids I grew up with, I wasn't addicted to the flashbox. But, of course, for some reason I decided to just lay there for a bit, mindlessly stare at the flashing images. I couldn't tell you what channel it was on, and I was too tired and too lazy to get up and try to find what my cousin had done with the remote. So for several minutes, I lay there, half asleep, watching infomercials in the glory days when Billy Mays is still the best pitch man in the business. Now, at some point, the last normal infomercial concluded, and the screen started playing ads for Girls Gone Wild. And suddenly I found myself a little more awake than I had been. Now, you could laugh, but hey, I was 15, and it's not like I asked for them to play it. Some of you might even remember seeing similar ads like that back in the day, and maybe they even still play today. I wouldn't know. I don't have cable. All this has been to explain to you why I was awake at an ungodly o'clock in the morning paying attention to television while everyone else in the house slept like normal people. After the Girls Gone Wild ad had played on loop for what I'd estimate to be about 30 minutes, a sudden rush of static took its place, lingering for only a moment before giving way to a much darker picture that took me several seconds to adjust to. I was watching what appeared to be a quiet hallway in what might have been a hospital. The lighting was much dimmer than what you'd expect from a hospital, but that's what it reminded me of. There were several doors on either side of the hallway, and pieces of what looked like medical equipment dotted here and there along the way. As I wondered just what exactly I was looking at, a voice began to speak like a pitchman, only it didn't sound like a pitchman that I'd ever heard before. There was no enthusiasm, no relish, no over-the-top exclamations of life-changing miracle products. The male voice sounded gruff, flat, uncomfortable, as if speaking to an audience was not his usual state of affairs. He was no Billy Mays, and he sure as hell wasn't some Girls Gone Wild pornographer. Actually, the sound of his voice overtopped the barren, dimly lit hospital corridor was straight up eerie, and I was suddenly feeling very conscious of the earliness of the hour. I couldn't tell you how his opening lines began, but I can vividly remember the rest of what he said. So much so that I fear the commercial had been burned into my brain by some means beyond human memory. Some very light music was playing, almost out of the range of my hearing, but just loud enough to register as discordant and unnatural. It was as if whoever had selected the soundtrack had purposely chosen the most bizarrely menacing melody they could find and just sloppily slapped it over the video. I listened in disbelief as the man spoke over the sloppy music. Harvest Life has been making dreams come true for over 45 years. We specialize in revolutionizing human life as never before. Using our state-of-the-art research and development facilities, we consider your deposit as a personal investment into Harvest Life's future. That's right. When you do business with us, you're in for life. Just reading that now makes it sound so much more polished than it actually was. Nothing about it sounded professional. The dissonance between the man's words and what I was seeing and hearing was so striking, it made my arms break out into shivers. And suddenly the camera flashed to what seemed to be a kennel, rows and rows of cages lined either side of the room, and there were cages stacked on top of cages as well. Quick shots showed creatures huddled in the corners of these cages or else feeding or drinking from bowls. Laminated plastic tags hung from the bars like name tags, but... Wait a minute. Were those... Many of our customers find themselves down on their luck in the land of love, but Harvest Life has the means to not only change your luck, but we guarantee to stack the deck entirely in your favor. To do so, we provide two options. Build-A-Girl is our custom mail order partner service. We'll have you fill out an online untraceable questionnaire detailing your most desirable traits. Then our team of dedicated scientists will get to work building your perfect love from our tremendous stock. For premium members of our Love Matching Club, we offer an even more exclusive tier known as Happy Endings, which will fundamentally transform you and your intended partner, body and mind. The camera flashed back to the cages, and there was no mistaking it. Those were human faces. Each person in the cage appeared to be naked, even though the camera never lingered on them long enough to be absolutely sure. At Harvest Life, we care about you. That's why, with your initial purchase of any Harvest Life product or service, we automatically enroll you in a trial membership with our trusted partner, the First National Memory Bank, the leader in the global harvest of traumatic memory. Any payments made through the First National Memory Bank are completely untraceable and must be made in person at the branch nearest you. For more details, call the number on your screen. An 800 number began to flash below, but strangely, although I can recall every word the man said, I can't remember the number at all. I kept watching the advertisement with mounted dread, wondering just what the hell I was actually seeing. Was this some kind of trick? A prank? This is long before the days that YouTube pranks began, though. Suppose that doesn't mean some prankster wasn't responsible for this. Though somehow, I don't think that's really what it was. I watched the screen flash an image of the globe slowly revolving to show all sides. Harvest Life LLC is a proud member of the Global Consortium of Private Consumption, aiming to cater to every need of our loyal member base. One-time customers are invited to apply for permanent membership upon successful payment of their sample at the local branch of the First National Memory Bank. The GCPC is not interested in money. We are interested in furthering our global influence in order to provide revolutionary service to our loyal members. Contact the number on your screen for information on how and where to provide your sample for payment. The screen flashed again to show researchers in white lab coats and protective wear, analyzing vials of some dark substance that appeared to be blood, and something else, something far less easily identifiable. It was dark and swirling, and if I had to guess, I would say that the label on the container said trauma. Another flash showed the kennels again and a shadowed figure being led by a leash. Then another flash, and there was a picturesque scene of a romantic candlelit dinner. On one end of the table sat a stunning woman in a very revealing outfit, gazing adoringly at a decidedly unattractive man. Harvest Life stands ready to lend either its Build-A-Girl service or its top-tier happy ending service of radical transformation on your behalf. But hurry! Contact the number on your screen immediately before the next rotation begins in order to begin a life worth living, or your opportunity will be lost forever. Be ready to comply with the bank's request for your sample as soon as possible. We pre-select our audience. If you're seeing this ad, you know that Harvest Life has already identified you as a kindred spirit, and we make our effort to you with the trust that you will make the right decision. If you're ready to make life start working for you, call the number on your screen today. Harvest Life cares about you, and remember, once you do business with us, you're in for life. There was a dead zone for several seconds as the commercial ended, and white static filled the screen before suddenly giving way to yet another scene of drunk college girls doing things they would inevitably regret. I couldn't quite believe what I had just watched. I mean, to this day, I still can't quite fathom what that commercial was about. After a while, I did eventually get up, turn off the TV, but as I settled into bed trying to make sense of what I'd seen, I couldn't help but be weirded out by the whole thing. Especially the last part. We pre-select the audience. Harvest Life has already identified you as a kindred spirit. What the hell was that all about? The next morning, after an extremely unsettling night's sleep, I casually asked my cousin if he had seen any of the commercials on TV that night. Of course, he had slept soundly and was oblivious to any of the strangeness that had taken place. The rest of the vacation went by in utter normalcy. No bizarre television ads were to be seen. No matter how late I stayed up. Days were spent at the beach, nights on the boardwalk. I had to hand it to my uncle. As I watched his wife laugh at lame jokes and hang on to his every word, my new aunt was quite a vision. Way out of his league, in fact. And it always struck me as odd how quickly my uncle remarried after his first wife disappeared. Her death was ruled a suicide, though, and as far as I know, nobody ever recovered. Of course, that wasn't the strangest thing I pondered in the summer of 2006. I've had a strong craving for a while, to the point that it's all I can think about. This isn't really anything new. I kind of go through cravings like this from time to time. In fact, a few years back, I had one thing on my mind. Honey persimmons. Fruit of the gods, as they are sometimes referred to. And for good reason. Everything about them is so exquisite, from the smooth gold orange skin to the creamy texture on the inside. The flavor is incomprehensible. And if I had to take a crack at it, I would say it's like a cantaloupe and a peach. We're married in a pool of honey. That still doesn't do the honey persimmon justice, however. Sadly, they're seasonal. October through February is when you can see these bad boys in store. It was June when I started my honey persimmon craze, of course, so I was a little desperate to get my hands on some. I googled if any nearby stores were selling honey persimmons, and when the website didn't say if they had them or not, I would call the stores and ask, but I would always get a polite, "No, I'm sorry." Thought I was going to end up in a straitjacket if I didn't have honey persimmons sometime soon. I had just finished doing my futile laps around the produce section of a grocery store when I saw a pink piece of paper that read, "Honey persimmons, year-round." I felt like a shaken soda can, bubbly and ready to explode. I'm not a religious man, but if I were, I'd like to know what I did to get on God's good side. The drive was about 3 hours away, but I figured it'd be worth it if I brought back a couple honey persimmons. My mouth was watering just thinking about biting into one of those juicy, sweet, and heavenly orbs. I immediately checked the time to see if I could have gone that day, but sadly I was going to have to wait until the next day, so I could hardly sleep. I wanted to leap out of bed and just start the drive, but I made myself wait. Once dawn crept over the horizon, I called in sick at work, and I prepared for the drive. 3 hours on the road felt like 9, and that wasn't just because I was excited for some badass fruit. Where I live, once you exit the city limits, the world turns into flat farmland with absolutely nothing to look at. I listened to a few podcasts to fight boredom, but the words would immediately fade into nonsense as my mind drifted towards honey persimmons. During one of these fruit-based daydreams, my mind snapped back inside the car at the sound of static from my speakers. I checked my phone to see if I was losing signal. I had full bars. Creeping through the static sounded like a baby crying, but otherwise, the best I could describe the sound is if a whale tried to do an impression of a human baby crying. You know, I tried changing the podcast, switching to different apps, resetting my phone. Nothing worked. I eventually just turned off my phone and finished the drive in silence. I could see rain off in the distance when I neared the address advertised on the Honey Persimmons year-round flyer. The closer I got, the harder it came down. It escalated from a few drops to a light pitter-patter and finally to the sky actively trying to drown me. The GPS finally gave me the final instruction. Turn right, then arrive at your destination. I turned right, pulled into a long gravel driveway with an older-looking house at the end. The gravel wetly crunched beneath my tires as I pulled up next to the house patio with a sign that said, Honey Persimmons, year-round. A man was sitting in a wicker chair on the patio, looking out towards the rain. I stepped out of my car with my plastic bin that I had brought for the honey persimmons. I was immediately soaked. I did a light jog towards the patio and stopped at the stairs. "What's up with all the rain?" I said, trying to make small talk before I got down to business. "It's come," the man said with a voice as gravelly as the driveway. Yeah, I can see that," I said, looking around. Yeah, I'm here about the honey persimmons." "Oh, well, come on in. Let's get you out of all this wet crap," the man said with his eyes now fixed on me. I trotted up the stairs and onto the patio. "Is that the bin for the persimmons?" the man asked. "Yeah, I'm kind of obsessed," I clumsily replied. The man scratched his chin and nodded. "All right, well, hand me that bin, I'll go up and fill her up." As he took my bin, I noticed his shirt was dotted with silver dollar wet spots. They didn't look like they were caused by the rain. He went inside the house, and soon after, I thought I could hear the whale baby cry again. It was eerily calm. Tried to focus on the haunting cry and see where it was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from above. I looked up, but I could only see white-gray rain clouds. Looking out on the stretch of land in front of the house, puddles of rain grew into miniature white lakes. In one of the puddles, I saw what I thought was some sort of pole, but when it moved, I realized it was a person. They looked like they were holding something towards the sky. "Hey!" My gravelly voice punched through the relaxing sounds of the rain. I jumped and turned around to the source of the exclamation. The man stood in the doorway, propping a screen door open. "Don't drink the rainwater," he said sternly. "I wasn't," I began to say before he shushed me. "Nope, I don't care if you were or you weren't, just don't. Reckon?" He finished with a raise of his eyebrow. I nodded, and he went back inside. I saw the wet spots on his shirt were now red. I was willing to forgive a lot of strangeness for honey persimmons, but I was beginning to think that I should head back and cut my losses. Just as I turned around, something hard was shoved between my lips. A thick, salty liquid pooled into my mouth and trickled down my throat. I shoved the person away from me and coughed violently. A young man holding a mason jar painfully laughed. "Now you'll see him too." "The hell is wrong with you?" I shrieked. "You don't hear it? You don't hear the song? He sings when he gives us the fertile rain." The young man's eyes widened. Red eyes hid behind long hair, wet hair. His lips twitched up and down as if he didn't know if he wanted to smile or frown. The world darkened as if the rain clouds had suddenly thickened. The eerie crying sound was now deafening. I could feel the force of each cry in my chest. I looked up towards the sky and I saw a dark behemoth, contrasted against the same white-gray clouds. It was vaguely whale-like in appearance, with a wide tail, 2 flippers on either side of its body, but that's where the similarities ended. In place of where the whale's face would be were 3 infant faces, imperfectly fused together as if they They had budded at separate times. Scattered across the body were more infant faces varying in size, all of which were imperfectly fused together as well. Their faces did not cry in unison. Some of their eyes were open, revealing black, glossy orbs. Some of their eyes were shut with thick tears that trickled down the other faces. This nightmarish wail moved as slowly and as subtly as the clouds that it weaved itself in and out of. "Don't let him fool you," the young man warned. "Those aren't tears," he laughed, then made overly acted, gagging sounds and motions. The man came back outside with my bin, took one long look at me and said, "Damn it." The young man stopped laughing, lowered his head and hid his hands behind his back. "And I see Junior made you drink some of the rain, even though I told him to stay in his room," the man said, his last words strongly addressed to the young man. My stomach was sinking. I felt as if I was drowning in shock. "Listen, the kid hadn't been right since his mom died in childbirth. The rain's just too fertile," the man said calmly. "It's so fertile that it even affects Dad," Junior said, pulling a teratoma-like mass out of his pocket. I felt vomit creeping up my throat. "Damn it, Junior, go up to your room!" The man bellowed as he covered the wet red spots on his shirt with his hand. Junior walked into the house and slammed the screen door behind him. The man shrugged, then handed me my bin. "Let's say we just treat this as a normal business transaction," the man began as the colossal wail cried. "Forget you saw that thing. Drank the rain that isn't really rain, and you can just go home or you'll eat your persimmons and try your best to regain normalcy." The man gave a weak, sympathetic smile. "I could just call the authorities," I said, feeling like I had to combat this however little I could. The man's weak smile grew strong. "Good luck with that," he said, as the wail cried again. There was a long, pregnant pause. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out $30. Paid for the honey persimmons. And I left. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror and stared as the whale-like abomination was swallowed by white-gray clouds, leaving just a dull silhouette of its massive tail. The farther away I got from the rain, the more dreamlike and unreal the experience was, as if it had never happened. Keeping my eyes on the road, I reached into the bin, pulled out a honey persimmon, and took a bite. A warm, copper taste filled my mouth instead of the sweet, juicy taste I expected. Strands of hair were connected to the bite I took, and to what I thought was the honey persimmon. I inspected the false fruit. I saw it was a mass of flesh, filled with hair and teeth. I pulled the hair out of my mouth. I stared at the road in shock while holding the bleeding teratoma. I don't know why, but I didn't feel like throwing up out of disgust. No, I felt compelled to take another bite. Over the course of the 3-hour drive back home, I had eaten every last one in the bin. And they're all I can think about now. I'm obsessed. I'm gonna have to go and get another bin full again sometime. Maybe I'll bring 2 bins. George yawned and fidgeted on the carpet. The light from my bedside lamp caught his blonde hair and it made it shine like a halo. He twirled a lock from his fringe around his index finger, let it snap back into place, and started twirling it again. The kid looked bored. He'd obviously agreed to come round mine for a sleepover because I was new at school, and he wanted to see what kind of house I lived in. Get a sense of what I was like. But I could tell he was already regretting the decision. "Thought you said you had a PS4. George's eyes flicked around the bedroom, as if he was hoping the console would magically appear from somewhere. We'd been upstairs since dinner. He'd explored my room, we'd chatted for a bit, then watched some random shows on Netflix. Things were going okay at first, but as the last light bled out of the day and the sky outside darkened, I could tell George was losing interest. That was when I suggested we do something a bit different. Nah, I don't have one, I said, sorry. Are you still up for having a go at this game, though? What, telling each other stories? Isn't that little kid stuff? George glanced at his watch on his wrist. I followed his gaze. George's watch was the first thing I noticed about him. He sits in front of me in English, and I spotted the watch after a ray of sunshine glinted off of its face and caught my eye. It's a really nice watch. Most of the kids in my year have digital watches, those blocky ones that light up when you press a button on the side, but George's watch was different, more adult. It was one of the reasons why I picked George to invite over. Hey, can I try your watch on? George looked at me and frowned. What? Your watch. Can I try it on? It's really nice. George stared at me for a second longer. One hand moved to touch the strap on his wrist as if to make sure that it was still secure. Sorry, I don't let anyone try on my watch. My dad said I'm not allowed. He glanced around the room once more, his eyes going from the door to the dark window. He sighed. Okay, let's play this dumb game then. What do I have to do? Ignoring the bored look on his face, I smiled. It's really easy. We just take turns telling each other scary stories, like the scariest story you can possibly think of. Then, whoever's is the scariest wins the game. George rolled his eyes. He stretched his long legs out in front of him. I don't know any scary stories. Besides, I think I might get some sleep soon. I'm pretty tired. Oh, come on, just one each. You must know at least one scary story. Everyone does. Plus, I know loads of good ones. I watched George's face for a reaction. Unless you're one of those kids that's frightened easily, that is. Then I guess you might not like the game. It was a risk. But George bit. I'm not scared of anything. The skin below his blonde hair creased into a frown. I've watched horror films with my big brother that are rated 18. We even found one on YouTube that's banned, and I still watched it. I didn't say anything. Just looked back at George and smiled. After a few seconds, he let out another sigh. Fine, let's play your stupid game then. But after you're done failing to scare me, that's it. I'm going to bed. George went first. His story wasn't bad, in fairness. It was one that he said his uncle told him a couple of years back. Nothing I hadn't heard before. Basically, there were two kids, and one of them gets hit by a car and dies. And after the funeral, the mother gives the surviving kid some money to go and get liver from the store, something to cook up for dinner. Because he's sick in the head, though, the kid pockets the money, digs up his brother, removes his liver instead. Then, later that night, the dead brother rises from his grave to come and get the kid in his sleep. It's a decent enough story, but I've heard it 100 times already. I didn't let on, though. I made all the right faces, jumped to the right parts. George got quite into it. He gestured with his arms, and his watch glinted in the light from the bedside lamp. His blonde hair spilled across his forehead. He was so into the story, he didn't seem to notice. After it was over, he sat back, brushed the hair from his eyes, and grinned. Thought you were going to shit yourself at one point, he said. You might as well give up now anyway. I'm not scared of anything. I looked across the room at him. The house was quiet now. Had been for a few hours. When we first come upstairs, there was still noise coming from below. The faint sound of the TV in the lounge, the rattle of plates being put away in the kitchen. Now there was only silence. Beyond the bedroom window, tree branches rustled in the wind. The occasional car passed by on the road outside. That was it. I grinned at George. So you're not scared of anything at all? Nope, nothing. Not even stories that are true? George let out a bark of laughter. Nice try. Just hurry up and get it over with, will ya? I'm already bored. Okay. Fine. I shuffled forward on the carpet, so I sat closer to George. Our knees were almost touching. George frowned, but he didn't move. My story's about a family, I began. A family that looks normal enough on the outside, but isn't really normal at all. George rolled his eyes again. He was starting to annoy me quite a bit by now, but I didn't let on. I just carried on with the story as if I hadn't noticed. Well, this family moves around a lot. They never stay in one place for too long. They can't, you see. The family's good at disguising themselves. They're good at hiding their secrets. But they still can't go taking risks. If they stayed in one place for any more than a few weeks, they might get found out. Someone might discover what they really are. So what are they then? I wanted to tell George not to interrupt, to just sit still and listen to the story. But I bit down the urge. Instead, I just grinned at him. The family are monsters, I said. They're all monsters. They travel from town to town. They leave a trail of dead kids wherever they go. I paused, expecting George to interrupt me again, but he didn't. He only stared back at me. There was no expression on his face as he twirled a lock of blonde hair around his finger. The family has a very specific way of doing things, I continued. When they move into a new area, they find a house that's been left unoccupied. Not a completely empty house, just one where the people that normally live there are off on holiday or something. One that'll be empty for a week or two. The family doesn't need long, see, a couple of weeks suits them just fine. So they break into the house, and then they go about setting the trap. It's their own kid they use. They send him off, make friends in the new neighborhood, around the nearby parks, maybe off to the local school under a fake name, tell him to get to know the other kids. The family is hungry by this point, really badly hungry. But they don't do anything just yet. They've learned to be patient. I paused and took a breath. This was a story I'd told before, but I found I liked it more and more with each retelling. The trick was not to rush through. You had to savor it. I'd opened the bedroom window when we first came upstairs, and now a draft of cold air blew through. It ruffled the curtains behind George. Tree branches shook in the garden outside, the leaves whispering to each other. George watched me, not saying anything. I had his attention. The kid's parents don't have to wait long, I continued. They never do. They've trained the kid well. See, he's not just a victim in all this. He may only be young, but he knows how the game works. Once the family has been in the area for a little while, a few days, maybe a week at most, the kid makes his choice. He picks a new friend to invite back to their house. The parents give him an incentive, too. He's still too young to share the tastes they have. They tell him that's something he'll only acquire when he gets older. But he still gets something out of it. What does he get out of it? George's eyes were fixed on mine. His finger kept twirling that same lock of hair over and over again. "No, he gets the other kid's stuff," I replied. "Whoever he picks, he gets to keep all their belongings after his parents are finished with them." Somewhere in the house below us, a door slammed. George's eyes flicked away from mine towards the bedroom door, then back again. I smiled at him. So... George kept his eyes on me as he tried to formulate the question. So what exactly do the parents get? What do they do with the kids they take? "Oh, they eat them," I replied. "They eat their insides. They tear the kids open while they're still screaming. They pull out their guts and intestines by the handful, wolf everything down until there's nothing left but a husk." I grinned. Somewhere below us, a floorboard creaked. The sound was faint and muffled, and I didn't think George heard it. Can you imagine what someone looks like when they've had everything inside them removed? They hardly even look like a person at all. It's like the stuff a snake leaves behind when it sheds its skin. The glow from the bedside lamp made George's skin look pale. His lips were slightly parted as he stared at me. "But how do they get away with it?" he asked. "Do the parents of the kid that get taken come looking for them the next day, when their kids don't show up back home?" I grinned back at George. I'd been hoping he'd ask. "Well, the family's long gone by that point," I said. "They vanish like shadows in the night. The only thing they take with them is the remains of the dead kid, and when the parents come looking for them the next day, all they find is a locked house that belongs to somebody else. Another floorboard creaked. It was louder this time. We both heard it. The sound had come from the corridor outside the bedroom. George's head swiveled in the direction of the door. His eyes were wide in his pale face. What was that? Oh, that was nothing. I lied. Probably just the house settling. Nothing to be scared of, George. I eyed the watch on his wrist and imagined what it would look like on mine. From the corridor outside came the soft sound of approaching footsteps. Did you know that your sister hates you? Albert, the ventriloquist dummy, said to me in the semi-darkness. It fed me the same horrible words the night before and the night before, well, concerning different people, but always the same kind of bile. That the person in question hated me, secretly despised me, wished me ill. I don't believe you, I said, pulling the covers up to me. Please stop. Okay, asshole. Then answer me this. Why would I be lying about all these people? I had to stop and think for a second. Because you're miserable and you want everyone else to be as miserable as you. Nice try. But I don't experience misery. But humans can. Oh, very much so. Then the dummy went silent. Now it was my turn to experience hate. Hated the inevitable silences that followed our conversation. I lay in bed, wishing Albert would just go away. For the record, I didn't come up with the name, Albert. It was the name written on the card inside its front pocket. The dummy had definitely seen better days. A finger had gone missing. Something happened to a large chunk of its head. Chips of wood were missing here and there. That's one derelict dummy, my dad grinned at me as he put it in the back part of his trunk. He promised to fix the dummy once he got up, but things kept piling up. He just never got around to it. My mom hated the thing, saying it reminded her of Uncle Ted. Of course, most people would agree the thing was legitimately creepy. That chunk of head missing, the crooked jaw, it made me shiver a little. The first time it spoke to me, I woke from a deep sleep thinking my dad had been the source of the creepy whispering sound. Then I heard it again. Miles. Miles, I know you can hear me. Needless to say, it scared the hell out of me. It didn't say anything more, but I knew the dummy had spoken. It sat there in the darkness, making my skin crawl. I was old enough that I knew I couldn't tell my parents a dummy had spoken to me because they would think I'd lost my mind. Old enough to realize I wasn't a kid anymore, but young enough that my dad had seen the dummy on the side of the road and wanted to indulge a gone-too-soon passion of my youth. So the dummy kept waking me up at night, tormenting me with hateful words. I tried throwing it away, of course. Not in the garbage, because that would be too obvious. I waited until one day when my mom and dad were out of the house to bury him in the backyard, way out by the oak tree near the edge of the lawn, so hopefully he wouldn't see it. But that didn't help. And deep down, I knew it wouldn't. Albert reappeared the next night without a speck of dirt on him. You think you could get rid of me that easily? Not a chance, he said that night. One night, something truly terrifying happened, even beyond what I had been experiencing recently. I woke to the sound of whispering, as usual, hateful words. Except when I rolled over to give a retort to Albert, I saw something Something glowing emerged from the hole in Albert's head. It looked like a mixture between a termite and a slug. I was afraid more than usual and clutched the covers to my chin. The termite slug snickered. "You know what I am, Miles?" the slug asked. Fear addled my brain and prevented me from speaking at first. After I regained my wits, I said, "Well, you look like a cross between a termite and a slug to me. Please don't eat me." The slug just snickered. "I have much bigger plans for you," it responded, "and for myself, too. I truly want a vessel I can be proud of." Then the slug disappeared into Albert's head, leaving me shivering with fear. After seeing that, I just couldn't remain in my room. I took my covers, I went to sleep on the couch. That morning, my dad kicked the couch hard. "Wake up, sleepyhead, we got lawn work." "And don't worry, you're both getting a big breakfast before that," Mom yelled cheerfully from the kitchen. We ate in the kitchen, sun streaming through the window. Should have been a happy day, but I just couldn't take my mind off the horrifying slug-like creature that I had seen last night. Once breakfast was over, my dad helped take the dishes to the sink, walking a bit stiffly. He never talked about his leg injury much, but he seemed to be managing. Out in the garage, my dad put a hand on my shoulder. "Everything okay, son?" Dad asked, a benevolent smile on his face. "Been looking a little down lately." I couldn't tell him about Albert, the termite slug, tormenting me at night with the horrible things to say about my family and my friends. I just told him I wasn't sleeping well lately, which was the truth, in a sense. We completed the lawn work without incident. I did most of it, and Dad thanked me with an affable, beaming smile. Thin black clouds began to appear in the sky. Dad said that he'd tackle the bushes in front of the house later. The grass was trimmed, and that was the important thing. I made a mental note to do the bushes for him. The rest of the day went by uneventfully, until something disturbed me from my sleep again. I was used to it by this point, still scared, but used to being scared, if that makes sense. I jolted upright, cleared my eyes, and looked in the direction of the sound. I stared at the glowing slug, fear growing. It seemed to be snickering again. An expression of evil humor, then it disappeared into the drawer. Nothing happened for a few minutes, and my heart did its best to fill the silence. The drawers began to move slowly in and out one by one in order from top to bottom. I could hear Albert's evil snickering. "I told you, I'm on the search for the perfect vessel. I will find it." As I took my covers and pillow downstairs, I thought about finally telling my parents about Albert. I just couldn't keep going on like this. I could barely sleep at night, and they would only put up with me sleeping on the couch for so long before they demanded I tell them what was going on. I put the covers and pillow on the couch, walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I thought about Albert's words. He said he wanted the perfect vessel. My hands on the edge of the sink, I continued to force out the answer. The perfect vessel. Albert had gone from the dummy to the dresser. They were both made from wood, and Albert very much resembled a termite, a slug too, but point being mostly termite. And just as I put the pieces together, I heard a loud thud on the floor. I ran out of the kitchen and practically leapt upstairs. I found my dad sprawled out on the floor, unconscious but breathing. My feet bumped into his wooden leg. Mom came out and we helped him to his feet. We managed to do so, but he stumbled on his leg, and after a minute, he seemed to stabilize. We were able to guide him back to bed. Fear growing in me as I saw Dad sitting there, struggling to regain full consciousness. "Do you need anything, dear?" Mom asked, putting a hand on his slumped shoulder. Dad just shook his head, almost slobbering a little. Within an hour, he talked, slowly but coherently. The words eventually came more quickly, and once it seemed like he had mostly recovered, I said goodnight. I was going to my room, but I'd be within earshot if he needed me. Inside my room, everything was quiet. I couldn't shake the eerie atmosphere, half expecting Albert to pop out at me, crawling out of the dummy shell of a head. But it didn't. I wandered over to the dresser. I didn't even bother to turn the light on. Words had been etched into the top of the dresser. From wood to wood is simple enough. From wood to human is a major achievement. I could hear Albert's evil chuckling. And I left the room in a panic. Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and I just want to make sure that all of you guys are still staying safe and doing your best to stay inside and keep yourself quarantined if you can do so. For those of you who can't, really appreciate you guys doing what you have to do. So, all the best to all of you who are still working, and all the best to all of you who are forced to kind of stay home and are not able to work. If you guys are missing out on a lot of the conventions, which at this point, all of them that I was planning on going to this year with the exception of San Japan, looks like have been either canceled or pushed back. If you guys were looking forward to any of the conventions this year and are missing out on a lot of the artwork from some of your favorite authors or artists, take a look in the description down below. At least until the quarantine is over, you'll be able to find links to a bunch of my artist friends as well as authors in the description of every video. And of course, I will be bringing you guys stories every single day from now until the end of time, available here on YouTube as well as here on the podcast on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, and Google, and wherever else you can get podcasts. And now a very special thank you, big thank you, the biggest thank you I can possibly give to all of you who support on patreon.com/Mr. Creepypasta, who help keep the lights on in my house. Patreons such as Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Ken Lendo Higuchi, Brianna Ventine Jensen, Chompinski, The Red Oak Shield Virus, Sandy Barney, G. Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Stephen Van Huss, Tristan Pelton, Nico Cowell, The Ginger Bros, Dante Rao, Rafael Rodriguez, Last Blade Song, Eliminator 86, Nebsky, Steampunk Sinner, Caleb Dougal, Daniel Paulson, Sky Harbor, The Homeless Bird 93, Gabrielle Undefined, Barbie Carmen, Liam Newman, Aaron Stormcrow, Dr. Strawberry, Barbara Masio, Thomas Burgett, Azazel Rotten, Let's Get Scared, S-Man, Brandy Hasanori, and King DDD. Thank you guys so much for supporting on Patreon, as well as all of you that are shown in the description down below. And sweet dreams, everyone.